This is Soros Exposed, Episode 2. In Episode 1, we peeled back the layers on George Soros's Open Society foundations. We showed how billions of dollars flow through shadowy conduits like the Tide Center, funding networks that paint political opposition as racists, xenophobes, and/or Nazis. By funding what happens in the shadows, Soros gets his anonymity preserved and dissent against his plans silenced, all under the banner of an open society. In Episode 2, we follow the money. Where does it go? Who gets it? And what message or narrative is being pushed? From Europe's engineered migrant waves to America's overwhelmed southern border, the playbook is the same. This is the story of how Soros-backed organizations helped underwrite the largest immigration surge in U.S. history, and the devastating cost to our nation in sovereignty, safety, and lives.
During the election of 2020,
I would in fact make sure we immediately surge to the border.
Candidate Biden invited the huddled masses of the planet to beat a path to the southern border of the United States with the promise that illegal aliens would be welcomed with open arms.
All those people are seeking asylum. They deserve to be heard. That's who we are.
Beginning on January 20th, 2021, the Biden administration delivered on that promise and opened our borders to the world.
It doesn't take long for these Hondurans to push through the lines of soldiers at Guatemala's eastern Amur border and press on, their aim to reach the United States.
Under the Biden administration, border encounters reached a staggering 10.8 million persons. Roughly 2 million of those were gotaways, migrants who slipped past authorities and vanished without a trace.
The other number, 500,000 known gotaways so far this year.
Sovereignty be damned.
I'm glad it's coming out and people are talking about it. The National Border Patrol Council has been screaming about the gotaways for a year and a half now.
The impact of this invasion rippled far beyond the border.
Montgomery County Police right now have 2 men under arrest in custody. They are charged with contacting a 12-year-old girl, transporting that girl to a location in Wheaton, Maryland, and sexually assaulting her.
Our national sovereignty eroded.
Our agents were being assaulted. A large group rushed the area and they were throwing rocks and bottles at my men and women.
The rule of law stretched to its limits.
642,000 crimes committed against Texans alone at the hands of illegal immigrants in just a 7-year period.
Public safety put at grave risk.
Finally, there's another stash house that we assisted in helping with that they literally had cages in the houses where they were keeping women.
And the nation's fiscal health pushed to the breaking point.
Breakdown and corrosion of rule of law has a significant economic effect insofar as it undermines people's certainty that the laws will be followed and the laws will be obeyed and the laws will be coherently applied.
This wasn't simply a failure of policy or enforcement. It was actively aided by a vast web of non-governmental organizations, fueled by hundreds of millions in foundational grants, including substantial support from George Soros's Open Society foundations.
In December, 250,000 migrant encounters. It's the highest ever recorded, and data shows that non-governmental organizations, or NGOs, helped fund many of their journeys.
Yeah, we talk about this number as a problem, but there are plenty of people out there who want it to be bigger if they can.
The outcome was a profound transformation of America that few voters could have ever dreamed of, let alone support.
And who funds those organizations? According to public record, a lot of that money ties back to this guy right here, George Soros.
If you only take away one thing from this documentary, let it be this. Not a single American voted for this invasion. Yet, here we are. To understand how this happened, we first have to define the players.
The scheme works in a cycle.
One of the biggest group of players is NGOs.
The left has funneled hundreds of billions of federal tax dollars through non-governmental organizations, NGOs.
NGOs, otherwise known as non-governmental organizations, are private entities that often present themselves as independent charities. But in practice, they function as extensions of government power, a shadow branch pushing agendas taxpayers never approved of or voted for.
The nonprofits essentially serve as an arm of the government. If the permanent bureaucracy is the de facto fourth branch, then these leftist NGOs are the fifth.
In June 2025, Republican Congresswoman and Chairwoman Marjorie Taylor Greene pulled back the curtain on exactly how this alleged money laundering scheme works and described the process with chilling clarity.
Democrat administration officials work with leftist NGOs to implement programs in a manner that ensures those NGOs receive massive grants and contracts. The leaders of those recipient groups then turn around and donate to Democrat political campaigns. Federal agencies fund the NGOs, and the NGOs shape the agency's behavior. It can be hard to tell where the government ends and the NGO begins.
It's a closed loop. Your tax dollars flow out to these groups. They advance radical policies, like open borders. Their leaders cycle donations back to Democrats, ensuring the spigot always stays open.
Far too many NGOs are really BGOs, basically government organizations, for two reasons. First, they get most of their money from government, not citizens. Second, they serve the big government political agenda that fights to centralize power in Washington for the benefit of the left's preferred political party.
Take Catholic Charities, for example. Catholic Charities raked in over $2 billion during Biden's 4 years. Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service received more than $221 million in grants in fiscal 2023 alone.
So, we mentioned non-governmental organizations funded by Soros. Let's take a look at some of those organizations. The Immigration Equality Center, the American Immigration Council.
What do groups like this do, American Immigration Council? Pushing for sanctuary cities.
With all that cash available, it's easy to understand how the victims of illegal immigration get lost in the shuffle. But Greene didn't forget.
Where were these NGOs when 22-year-old Laken Riley was violently murdered by an illegal? When 12-year-old Jocelyn Nungare was brutally raped and murdered by one of these illegals? And where were these NGOs when 20-year-old Kayla Hamilton was raped and strangled to death by an illegal? Where were these NGOs over the weekend when the illegal alien launched Molotov cocktails into a crowd in Boulder, Colorado, intentionally injuring a dozen Americans in an anti-Semitic attack?
Authorities quickly arrested 45-year-old Mohammed Sabri Solomon. They said that he shouted "Free Palestine" during the attack.
Where were the NGOs? They were busy. They were busy raking in more and more cash while sneaking millions of illegal aliens across our borders. Meanwhile, the families of the victims of this illegal alien invasion are ignored and left to grieve. The pattern didn't originate at America's southern border.
Since the beginning of summer, there hasn't been a day with a higher number of illegal border crossers than Friday.
It was refined in Europe, where George Soros first laid out his vision.
Authorities had to stop illegal border crossers at Ashut Halom, Opatfova, and Calabria, just to name a few.
On September 26, 2015, George Soros publishes his 6-point plan. The European Union must accept at least 1 million asylum seekers annually, finance it with long-term bonds, establish safe channels, routes starting in Greece and Italy, funneling migrants straight through countries like Hungary.
Migrants had been pouring into Europe for months, but these images of a drowned Syrian boy on a Turkish beach in September shocked the world and drew Western sympathy for those fleeing a worsening conflict in Syria. Hungary, overwhelmed, put up a razor wire fence and in October closed its border.
NGOs became the delivery system for Soros's vision, turning words into action across Europe. Groups backed by Soros-funded organizations like Pro-Asile sprang up with websites that read like playbooks for evading borders. They offered step-by-step guides, coaching migrants on exactly what to say to border guards, how to craft stories that maximized chances for refugee status, even if it meant bending the truth.
We've also just found this as well, which is quite interesting. It's a guidebook.
Pocket-sized handbooks circulated.
Inside are maps, an idea of the route people need to take, of reception centers.
And then there were the alarm phones, hotlines migrants could call from distressed boats at sea.
And then it's all in Arabic, of course, but at the front are websites and phone numbers for the Red Cross, for example.
Triggering coordinated pressure on authorities to intervene and rescue, often ferrying them straight to European shores. By 2016, the shift was undeniable. Frontex, the EU's border agency, reported that NGO vessels were involved in 40% of Mediterranean rescues, a dramatic surge from just a few years earlier. Hungary saw it for what it was, a coordinated effort to overwhelm national borders. Prime Minister Viktor Orban took to the stage and laid it bare.
EU has to accept at least 1 million asylum seekers annually. Safe channels must be established for asylum seekers, starting with getting them from Greece and Italy to their destination countries. It's a plan which is going on. It was written. It was published. It's known. So we are fighting again an organized gang.
Hungary struck back with the Stop Soros law.
The Hungarian government has introduced legislation that it calls Stop Soros, referring to billionaire financier George Soros, who wants Europe to accept millions of migrants, and which Hungary opposes.
A new law is being debated that would criminalize any support, including legal advice, given to asylum seekers who do make it through.
Soros responded by pulling his foundation out of the country altogether.
We have been forced by the government of Hungary to move our U.S.-accredited programs to Vienna.
But the tactics didn't remain confined to Europe. Soros had long viewed national sovereignty as an anachronistic concept, an outdated barrier to his idea of an open world. His foundations poured resources into the fight, $140 million in 2021 alone, to politically aligned nonprofits, with another $170 million flowing personally to Democratic causes. When the Biden administration took office, the gates swung wide. Parole programs brought in hundreds of thousands by air, often with minimal vetting. And border encounters soared. George Soros' long-term plan to fill Western countries with uneducated and unskilled immigrants from some of the most violent and corrupt nations on Earth had proven so successful in Europe, it was now ready to be tested stateside. And the stakes couldn't be higher. Even within liberal circles, the overwhelming influence George and Alex Soros and their NGO organizations have on Democrat politics and policies when it comes to the subject of immigration is beginning to be openly discussed and criticized. As recent as April 2025, New York Magazine's in-depth profile, The New Soros, examines Alex Soros stepping into his father's role. The article reveals a stark reality. Democratic candidates cannot oppose illegal immigration or even adopt moderate positions without triggering a coordinated assault from nonprofits, nearly all sharing one common benefactor: Soros. Peter Flaherty, chairman of the National Legal and Policy Center, put it bluntly.
In a Democratic Party, anybody who takes a moderate or nuanced position on immigration has their career immediately destroyed. The Soros groups are omnipotent in the Democratic Party. And that's just not my opinion, that's the opinion of a journalist for New York Magazine that wrote a lengthy story about this. He was lamenting the fact that Democrats cannot be moderates these days because all the money goes to the hard left wing of the party.
In the summer of 2019, 8 progressive NGOs launched a campaign to decriminalize border crossings.
Problem is that right now, the criminalization statute is what gives Donald Trump the ability to take children away from their parents.
The idea polled terribly with voters. Yet at a Democratic debate, 8 of 10 presidential candidates pledged support.
If you'd be so kind, raise your hand if you think it should be a civil offense rather than a crime to cross a border without documentation.
7 of those 8 progressive NGOs receive funding from open society foundations. A 9th later turns the pressure up on Biden. The message lands, and before you can say, "Bob's your uncle," Biden opened the border. These 9 organizations form a formidable network, bound by shared funding and ideology. United We Dream claims 1 million members. Its co-founder, Cristina Jimenez, speaks from personal experience.
Growing up undocumented, feeling always the fear that I could be deported, that my family could be deported. It was that fear, that constant fear that I could lose my loved ones and my family, that was my big motivator to do something about it. What United We Dream does is it brings people together to talk about our stories, to support each other, to be able to move from fear to finding our voice and to be empowered.
Empowerment, they call it. In reality, they're actually working to block deportations and pressuring weak politicians to vote for amnesty for all, regardless of criminal history, country of origin, political ideology, and most importantly, the threat they pose to American citizens. The Working Families Group is indifferent to the negative impact illegal immigration has on Americans and is a loud advocate for open borders, openly calling to completely halt deportations and abolish ICE altogether.
Abolish ICE has to be more than a slogan. It has to be a process for actually not just getting rid of the agency, but also getting rid of the functions of immigrant repression altogether.
Open borders. That's the goal. But until working families can make that a reality, they're working to broaden the offerings and protections of sanctuary cities for illegals.
And in Vista, WFP Councilmember Katie Melendez helped pass sanctuary city policies that protect immigrant rights, limit local federal law enforcement collaboration, ban enforcement on city property without a warrant, and provide Know Your Rights resources for the community.
Meanwhile, Move On has gone digital by flooding email inboxes with urgent pleas, turning petitions into pressure on lawmakers. And if there's anything weak politicians will cave to, it's the slightest pressure.
The purpose of what we're doing now is making legal immigration more streamlined and moving in a direction that people know that there's a legal way to get here and not a legal way.
Then there's Indivisible. Indivisible received more than $7.6 million from open society foundations between 2017 and 2023, and didn't hesitate to denounce measures like the Laken-Riley Act as racist and xenophobic.
Today, the U.S. House Rules Committee discussed a new federal bill aimed at tightening policies when undocumented immigrants commit crimes. It's all in response to the death of nursing student Laken-Riley on UGA's campus.
For context, Laken-Riley was a 22-year-old nursing student at the University of Georgia who was brutally murdered and beaten to death on a morning jog in February 2024 by a Venezuelan migrant who had entered the U.S. illegally.
Jose Ibarra entered the country illegally in 2022 and was arrested in New York in 2023 for endangering a child in a motor vehicle violation, and later in Athens for shoplifting.
The act allows ICE to detain illegals accused of crimes like theft or burglary.
Some local immigration organizations say the act may do more harm than good.
This was an act committed by an individual, not a community of people. When we want to respond quickly to something, we have to make sure that we're not just reacting, but that the resources are there to help, that there's people are paying close attention to make sure that they actually are solving a problem that needs to be solved.
Disgustingly for Indivisible, even this basic protection crossed a line. The Women's March, bolstered by $246 million routed to its partner organizations from 2010 to 2014, popularized slogans like "Build bridges, not walls," casting border enforcement as cruelty. Even climate activists like the Sunrise Movement got in on the immigration gravy train, to get their fair share of some of that Soros cash.
This is a reality for a lot of people of color, for a lot of poor people. They bear the brunt of the beginnings of what climate change is bringing. The refugees coming up from Honduras and from Central and South America as a whole up to our border right now, that is a climate crisis. How much less willing we would be able to tolerate this death if we were talking about white people and not people of color.
By weaving climate activism into open borders, Sunrise Movement snagged a cool $750,000 from Soros-linked PACs in 2020 alone.
This experience we demand, one of equality and justice, must become an issue that threatens corporate bottom lines, and it has to threaten elected positions.
If you listen closely, you'll realize the racial rhetoric and open border hyperbole of these Soros-funded NGOs all begin to echo like a single voice.
I want to move forward. And for me, moving forward means my daughter growing up in a world where she doesn't have to be a victim of what has cruelly become the social norm.
Their goals align seamlessly. Unlimited immigration as the path forward, alien rights above citizen rights, national sovereignty quietly subordinated to a global vision. Yet, Title 8, U.S. Code Section 1324, remains clear.
Any person who knowing that a person is an alien knowing or in reckless disregard, now you got a culpable mental state here, of the fact that an alien has come to, entered, or remains in the United States in violation of law conceals, harbors, or shields from detection, or attempts to conceal, harbor, or shield from detection, such alien in any place.
Aiding or abetting illegal immigration can carry felony charges.
You're all in violation of all three of these statutes. You got criminal culpability. I yield back.
Meanwhile, the network, the Soros Web, grows larger and more powerful and presses on undeterred. The Soros' Open Society Foundation's NGO web of influence reaches deep into the heart of America. Americans living along or near the U.S. southern border were the first victims of Soros' push for U.S. open border policies. The impact of Soros' uncontrolled illegal immigration policies was immediate and deadly.
8-year-old Aria Cruz Asensio was killed on a family car ride home in San Diego County after a Thanksgiving visit, when authorities say an intoxicated illegal alien from Guatemala crossed a double yellow line and crashed head-on into the family's car, driven by U.S. Marine Oscar Cruz Asensio.
The explosion of illegal immigration under Biden and Democratic policies rippled through the economy. Millions competing for the same resources drove up costs everywhere.
Just think about this. If you allow 20 million people to compete with American citizens for the cost of homes, you are going to have a large and frankly completely preventable spike in the demand for housing.
Housing prices spiked.
In the Reno area, single-family housing prices have soared. The median price up nearly 50% in 5 years to more than $600,000. And with mortgage rates still above 6%, the monthly cost puts buying a home out of reach for many.
Food bills climbed, with more mouths to feed straining supply chains.
American consumers are feeling the pinch when it comes to the cost of food. Overall inflation is certainly easing or slowing, if you will, but new Labor Department data shows that the amount being spent on eating has hit a 30-year high.
Jobs grew scarcer, wages stagnated.
Like my colleagues, I'm very concerned about wage stagnation.
Wage stagnation exploded as employers tapped into an ocean of low-cost labor. And although everyone knows exactly what's causing it, no one wants to accept any responsibility.
You know, it's the stagnation of middle-class incomes, the relatively low mobility that we have, the disappointing level of wages over a long period of time. It's all of a piece, and it all does go to that. And I think the causes of these things are really deep. It's not something we can address really successfully over time with monetary policy, as you say.
Working-class Americans, many in the multiracial communities these policies claimed to help, bore the brunt.
Immigration writ large has a material impact on Black culture. I think when we start to think about illegal immigration, it creates a new frame by which we think about this influx, because it's no longer just more underestimated people coming into the market. It becomes a question is, do they have a right to what people who are already here has?
Inflation bit harder. Opportunities slipped away. Frustration built. It was this perfect storm. Economic hardship layered on top of eroded safety and sovereignty that fueled the backlash.
Don't get me wrong, it's great that they want to help the immigrants, but what about the Americans that are already here?
Enough voters, ticked off by the chaos, turned out to put Donald Trump back in the White House.
Some other interesting data now being analyzed. Passaic, New Jersey, with a majority Hispanic population, went for Hillary Clinton by 52 points in 2016, then to Biden by 16 points in 2020. This year, it flipped to Trump. And in South Texas, Starr County flipped from blue to red for the first time in 100 years.
Once in office, with border czar Tom Homan at the helm, the reversal began.
Tonight, new numbers showing the dramatic change at the border.
We've got the most controlled border we've ever had in the history, and in my lifetime in the Border Patrol.
Encounters plummeted over 90%.
Border crossings this month are on track to be at the lowest in at least 25 years. And if the trend continues, migrant crossings could reach a 60-year low.
Deportations surged.
Immigration raids and deportations in Tennessee ramping up exponentially since President Trump took office earlier this year.
In 2025, Immigration and Customs Enforcement kicked off its raids in large cities across the country. By May, Nashville was in the bullseye.
Deterrence took hold, discouraging new waves before they started.
A daily average of 359 migrants have been caught crossing the southern border. For comparison, this time last year, that number was 4,850 migrants a day. That's a 90% decrease, according to the current data available.
Resistance against enforcing U.S. immigration law began to build among congressional Democrats.
ICE's immigration dragnet is just completely out of control.
Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller are f***ing liars.
We will send a message to ICE that secret police do not belong here.
This dog whistle for action from Democrats across the nation was all it took for the NGOs to kick into action and hit the streets with a legion of boomers demanding one more bite at the protest apple.
You! Stop!
Then, Trump sent ICE into Minneapolis and all hell broke loose.
Anti-ICE protests intensifying in Minneapolis. Agents clashing with demonstrators 1 week after Renee Good was shot and killed by an ICE officer.
Protests erupted immediately. Crowds, many appearing to be professional agitators backed by left-leaning NGOs, clashed with federal agents. Vandalism hit hotels housing ICE personnel. Then, Governor Tim Walz and Mayor Jacob Frey poured fuel on the fire.
Let's be very, very clear. This long ago stopped being a matter of immigration enforcement. Instead, it's a campaign of organized brutality against the people of Minnesota by our own federal government.
The moment Governor Walz wrapped up whipping the mob into an even bigger frenzy, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey said, "Hold my beer."
There's little I can say, again, that'll make this situation better, but I do have a message for our community, for our city, and I have a message for ICE. To ICE, get the out of Minneapolis.
Within days, the rhetoric escalated further. Left-leaning protesters began openly calling for direct, kinetic action and arming up against ICE.
This is exactly what I said was going to happen.
We can't wait till November. There's no waiting to the ballot box. We need to get to the bullet box.
This is exactly what I said was going to come when we didn't go and march on Whipple with guns.
The speed and efficiency of these highly organized and well-funded protests raises a grave question. Are NGOs funded by George Soros and others quietly fueling what looks increasingly like an insurrection, all while claiming tax write-offs for advocacy? The actions of these groups must be investigated for criminal activity.
You all need to be arming yourselves right now.
And those who fund them, those who bankroll violent protests and calls to arm up against federal law enforcement.
There is no protesting this without some sort of militant action.
Must be investigated and held accountable. Next time, a marriage that binds it all together. Alex Soros and Huma Abedin, Hillary Clinton's closest confidant, a union of billions and unrivaled access. What does this power couple mean for the future of influence in Washington, and in particular, the Democrat Party? The connections deepen and the story continues on the next episode of Soros Exposed.
You've been watching the Soros Network Exposed. If you value independent journalism that follows the money and names the names, like, follow, and share this series. Follow us on this platform and visit NLPC.org for full reports, documents, and updates on ongoing investigations. Thank you for watching.